Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of making a difference, but she never imagined it would happen on her third day at Naval Medical Center SAN. Fresh out of nursing school with barely 6 months of experience under her belt, she was still fumbling with the electronic health records system when the emergency call came through the hospital's intercom system. Code Blue, Emergency Department, Room 7. Code Blue, Emergency Department, Room 7. The announcement echoed through the corridors as Sarah was restocking supplies in the cardiac unit. She had been assigned to the night shift, the graveyard hours that most seasoned nurses avoided. Her supervisor, Wells, a 20-year veteran with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes, had made it clear that new nurses started at the bottom of the hierarchy. "Martinez, you're with me?" barked as she rushed past, her white sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floor. "Someone's brought in a cardiac emergency." Sarah's heart pounded as she followed through the maze of hospital corridors. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the constant hum of medical equipment filled her nostrils. She had been through Code Blue simulations during her training, but this was different. This was real life, where someone's existence hung in the balance. The emergency department was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Dr. James, the attending physician, was already working on the patient while 2 other nurses assisted. Sarah caught a glimpse of the man on the stretcher, an older gentleman with silver hair and weathered skin that spoke of decades spent in harsh conditions. "What do we have?" asked, immediately jumping into action. 72-year-old male, found unconscious in his hotel room, doctor reported without looking up from the patient. "No pulse when paramedics arrived. They got him back twice in the ambulance, but we lost him again 3 minutes ago." Sarah watched as the medical team worked with practiced efficiency. The heart monitor showed a flat line, the dreaded sound that every medical professional feared, the long, continuous beep that signaled cardiac arrest. Doctor was performing chest compressions while another nurse prepared medications. "How long has he been down?" inquired, checking the monitors. "Total downtime is approaching 12 minutes, doctor replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the emergency room. "We need to consider calling it." The protocol was clear. After 10 to 15 minutes of unsuccessful resuscitation efforts, it was often medically appropriate to declare time of death. But something inside Sarah rebelled against that decision. She had studied this patient's type before. His build, his posture even in unconsciousness, the way his companions had described him to the paramedics. Everything suggested this was someone accustomed to extreme physical challenges. "Doctor," Sarah found herself speaking before she realized it. "Has anyone checked his medical history? Military personnel often have different physiological responses to cardiac events." Doctor paused momentarily, looking at the young nurse with surprise. Shot her a warning glance, but Sarah continued. "I read about a case study during my training where a Navy SEAL was successfully resuscitated after 23 minutes because of his exceptional cardiovascular conditioning," she added, her voice gaining confidence despite her trembling hands. "Who is this patient?" Doctor asked, suddenly interested. One of the paramedics who had brought the patient in stepped forward. "Hotel staff said he checked in as Admiral William, retired. His wallet confirms it. There were 3 other guys with him, all looked military. They're in the waiting room." The name Admiral seemed to electrify the room. Doctor's expression changed immediately. This wasn't just any patient. This was someone who had dedicated his life to serving his country at the highest levels. "Continue compressions," Doctor ordered. "Martinez, what else do you know about military physiology?" Sarah's mind raced through her recent studies. Elite military personnel often have enlarged hearts and enhanced oxygen-carrying capacity. Their bodies can survive longer periods without circulation. We might need to try different medication protocols. Looked at her young colleague with new respect, but concern still etched her features. "Sarah, you're talking about extending a resuscitation far beyond normal parameters." "But what if we give up too soon?" Sarah replied, moving closer to the patient. "Look at his muscle definition even at his age. This man has maintained peak physical condition. His body might be fighting harder than we realize." Doctor made a decision that would change everything. "Okay, we continue, but I want different approach. Martinez, you mentioned different medication protocols. What did you have in mind?" Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her pocket reference guide. During nursing school, she had written a paper on cardiac resuscitation in elite athletes and military personnel. The research had fascinated her, though she never thought she would apply it in real life. Higher doses of epinephrine administered at longer intervals, she suggested. And we should consider hypothermia protocol. Military training often involves cold water survival. His body might respond to controlled cooling. The next 20 minutes became a blur of intense medical intervention. Sarah found herself working alongside seasoned professionals who gradually began to respect her knowledge and instincts. She prepared medications, monitored vital signs, and even suggested adjustments to the defibrillation settings based on her research. Doctor was methodical and calm, but Sarah could see the stress in his movements. Every few minutes, he would glance at the clock, knowing that each passing moment decreased the chances of successful resuscitation without brain damage. Still no response, reported after another round of compressions and medication. Wait, Sarah said suddenly, studying the heart monitor more closely. There was something, a small blip in the rhythm about 30 seconds ago. Doctor looked at the monitor printout. I don't see anything conclusive. It was brief, but it was there, Sarah insisted. Maybe his heart is trying to respond, but we need a different approach. What if we try synchronized instead of defibrillation? The suggestion was bold, especially coming from someone so new to the profession. Synchronized was typically used for patients with specific types of abnormal heart rhythms, not for those in cardiac arrest. That's not standard protocol, Doctor pointed out. But Admiral isn't a standard patient, Sarah replied. Everything about this situation is exceptional. Placed a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder. Doctor, she's right about the blip. I saw it too. It was faint, but there was definitely electrical activity. The decision to try synchronized was made collectively, with Doctor taking full responsibility. Sarah prepared the equipment while continued chest compressions. The entire emergency department seemed to hold its breath as Doctor charged the defibrillator. Clear, Doctor announced. The electrical shock coursed through Admiral's body, causing his back to arch slightly off the gurney. For a moment, silence filled the room except for the mechanical sounds of the ventilator and monitoring equipment. Then, impossibly, the heart monitor began to show a rhythm. We've got something, announced, her voice filled with cautious optimism. The rhythm was weak and irregular, but it was undeniably a heartbeat. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched the green line dance across the monitor screen. But they weren't out of danger yet. Pulse is weak but present, Doctor reported after checking the patient's carotid artery. Blood pressure is low but measurable. Let's get him stabilized and prepare for transport to intensive care. As the medical team worked to stabilize Admiral, Sarah stepped back and realized what had just happened. She, a nurse with barely 6 months of experience, had contributed to saving the life of a high-ranking military officer. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. Good work, Martinez, Doctor said quietly as they prepared to move the patient. Your knowledge and instincts made the difference tonight. Nodded in agreement. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen a rookie handle a situation like this. You should be proud. But Sarah's attention was drawn to the waiting room, where she could see several men packing anxiously. These had to be Admiral's companions, likely military personnel themselves, given their bearing and the way they carried themselves even in civilian clothes. Doctor, she said to Doctor, shouldn't we update his friends? They've been waiting for over an hour. Doctor looked toward the waiting room and nodded. You're right, they deserve to know what's happening. As they moved Admiral toward the intensive care unit, Sarah caught glimpses of the men in the waiting room. There were indeed 3 of them, all appearing to be in their 30s or 40s, with the kind of physical conditioning that suggested active military service. Their faces showed the strain of waiting, the helpless feeling that comes when someone you care about is fighting for their life, and there's nothing you can do to help. One of the men, a tall individual with short-cropped hair and intense dark eyes, approached Doctor as they passed through the corridor. Doctor, how is he? The man asked, his voice controlled but filled with concern. He's stable for now, Doctor replied. We were able to restore his heartbeat, but he's still in critical condition. The next 24 hours will be crucial. The man's relief was visible, his shoulders sagging slightly as the tension left his body. Thank you, Admiral is. He's important to a lot of people. Sarah continued to assist with getting Admiral settled in the intensive care unit, but she couldn't stop thinking about the three men in the waiting room. There was something about them that suggested they weren't just friends or colleagues. The way they had responded to the news, their obvious concern and respect for Admiral, indicated a deeper connection. As the night wore on and Admiral's condition gradually improved, Sarah learned more about the patient who had changed her life in a single evening. The nurse's station was buzzing with quiet conversation about who he was and what he had accomplished during his military career. He was Special Operations, one of the ICU nurses mentioned during a brief break. The kind of missions you don't read about in newspapers. Those guys in the waiting room, another nurse added, they're not leaving. Been there all night taking turns checking on him. Sarah's curiosity was piqued, but her primary focus remained on Admiral's medical care. She had volunteered to stay beyond her shift to help monitor his progress, partly because of her personal investment in his recovery, and partly because she wanted to learn more about treating patients with his unique background. Around 6 in the morning, as the day shift began to arrive, Admiral started showing signs of regaining consciousness. His eyelids fluttered, and his breathing pattern changed from the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator to something more natural. "He's waking up," Sarah reported to Doctor, who had also stayed through the night. Doctor performed a quick neurological assessment, checking Admiral's reflexes and responses. "Admiral, can you hear me? You're in the hospital. You've had a cardiac event, but you're going to be okay." The Admiral's eyes opened slowly, confusion evident as he tried to process his surroundings. "Where? What happened?" "You collapsed in your hotel room," Doctor explained gently. "Your heart stopped, but we were able to resuscitate you. You've been unconscious for several hours." Admiral tried to sit up, but Sarah gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You need to take it easy, sir. Your body has been through a lot." For the first time, Admiral focused on Sarah, taking in her young face and kind eyes. "You're my nurse." "Yes, sir, I'm Sarah Martinez. I've been helping take care of you." Something in the Admiral's expression suggested he understood there was more to the story. "How long was I down?" Doctor hesitated before answering. "Total downtime was approximately 18 minutes. It was touch and go for a while." Admiral's eyes widened slightly. 18 minutes was well beyond the typical window for successful resuscitation without significant brain damage. 18 minutes? How am I? How am I coherent? Sarah found herself speaking before Doctor could respond. "You're in exceptional physical condition, sir. Your body was able to handle the stress better than most people could." "She's being modest," Doctor added. "Nurse Martinez here insisted we continue resuscitation efforts when protocol suggested we should stop. Her knowledge of military physiology and her instincts quite literally saved your life." Admiral studied Sarah's face more carefully, seeing past her youth to the intelligence and determination that had guided his care. "A new nurse saved my life." "Experience doesn't always equal wisdom," Sarah replied quietly. "Sometimes a fresh perspective can see solutions that others miss." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the ICU door. One of the men from the waiting room stood in the doorway, relief evident on his face as he saw Admiral awake and talking. "Admiral, thank God you're okay," the man said, approaching the bed. Admiral replied, his voice still weak but warming with recognition. "How long have you been here?" "All night, sir. We all have been, when we found you in that hotel room." His voice trailed off, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Sarah watched the interaction between Admiral and beginning to understand the deep bonds that connected these men. This wasn't just professional courtesy or military hierarchy. These were people who had shared experiences that created unbreakable connections. "Doctor," Admiral said, turning back to Doctor, "I need to understand what happened. Cardiac arrest at my age with my medical history, this shouldn't have occurred." Doctor consulted his chart. "We're still running tests to determine the exact cause. Your heart appears structurally sound, and your recent medical records show excellent cardiovascular health. Sometimes these events can be triggered by stress, changes in medication, or even environmental factors." "We were here for a reunion," explained. "Admiral was supposed to give a speech at the Navy Special Warfare Command ceremony tomorrow. He'd been looking forward to it for months." Sarah's understanding of the situation continued to evolve. Admiral wasn't just any retired military officer. He was connected to Navy special warfare, which meant SEAL operations. The men in the waiting room were likely former SEALs themselves, explaining their loyalty and their physical conditioning. "The ceremony," Admiral said weakly. "I can't miss that. Those men deserve to be honored." "Sir, with respect, you need to focus on your recovery," replied firmly. "The ceremony can wait. What matters is that you're alive." Doctor nodded in agreement. "Admiral, you'll need to remain hospitalized for at least several days while we monitor your heart function and determine what caused the arrest. Any significant physical activity is out of the question for the immediate future." The disappointment on Admiral's face was evident, but Sarah could also see his acceptance of the medical reality. This was a man accustomed to following orders and understanding the importance of mission parameters. "Nurse Martinez," Admiral said, turning his attention back to Sarah, "tells me you insisted on continuing treatment when others might have given up. Is that true?" Sarah felt embarrassed by the attention, but answered honestly. "I just felt like we hadn't tried everything yet, sir. Your physical condition suggested you might respond differently than typical patients." "What made you think that?" he asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. "Your muscle tone, your cardiovascular history, the way your friends described your lifestyle. Everything pointed to someone with exceptional physical conditioning. I remembered reading about cases where elite athletes and military personnel had been successfully resuscitated after extended periods because their bodies were better equipped to handle the stress." Admiral exchanged a look with that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. "You study military medicine specifically?" "Not exactly, sir. I wrote a paper in nursing school about cardiac emergencies in high-performance populations. It was just academic interest at the time." "Just academic interest," Admiral repeated thoughtfully. "Young lady, do you understand what you've done?" Sarah shook her head, unsure of what he meant. "You've given me the chance to see my granddaughter graduate from college next month. You've allowed me to continue mentoring young SEAL candidates who need guidance. You've preserved relationships and memories and experiences that would have been lost forever." His voice grew stronger as he spoke. "That's not academic interest. That's a calling." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a warm blanket. She had gone into nursing because she wanted to help people, but this was the first time she truly understood the magnitude of what that could mean. As the morning progressed, and Admiral's condition continued to improve, word of his survival began to spread through certain military circles. Sarah didn't realize it yet, but her actions that night had set in motion a series of events that would change not only her career but her entire understanding of service and sacrifice. The second day of Admiral's recovery brought unexpected visitors to Naval Medical Center SAN. Sarah arrived for her shift to find the ICU buzzing with activity that went far beyond the normal routine. Security personnel had taken positions at strategic locations, and she noticed several men in business suits speaking quietly with hospital administrators. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, who was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station. "Word got out about Admiral," replied quietly. "Apparently, he's more important than any of us realized. The hospital administrator asked me to brief the incoming medical team about his case." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She had simply done her job as she understood it, but the growing attention made her wonder if she had somehow overstepped her bounds as a new nurse. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. Looked at her with surprise. "Trouble? Sarah, you're the opposite of trouble. Do you know who Admiral William is?" Sarah shook her head. She had been so focused on his medical care that she hadn't researched his background. "He commanded SEAL Team 6 during some of the most critical operations of the past 2 decades, explained. "The kind of missions that prevented terrorist attacks and saved countless lives. The men he trained and led are scattered throughout the special operations community. When word spread that he had died and been brought back to life, it created quite a stir." The implications of what was saying began to sink in. Sarah had not just saved any patient. She had saved someone whose influence extended throughout the military special operations community. "There's more," continued. "The 3 men who brought him in, they're not just friends, is a retired Master Chief Petty Officer who now works as a contractor training new SEAL candidates. The other 2, James and David Park, are both active duty officers with distinguished service records. They've been calling their contacts all night, telling them about what happened." Sarah felt overwhelmed by this information. I just did what I thought was right medically. That's exactly what makes this so remarkable, replied. You didn't treat him differently because of who he is. You treated him based on your medical knowledge and instincts. But the result is the same. You saved the life of someone who has dedicated his entire adult life to protecting others. As if summoned by their conversation, Doctor appeared at the nurse's station with a serious expression on his face. Martinez, I need to speak with you, he said. Admiral is asking for you specifically, and there are some people here who want to meet you. Sarah followed Doctor toward Admiral's room, noticing that the usual foot traffic in the ICU had been redirected. When they reached his room, she was surprised to see it filled with visitors despite the early morning hour. Admiral was sitting up in bed, looking significantly better than he had the night before. His color had returned, and his eyes were clear and alert. Surrounding him were James and David, along with two other men Sarah didn't recognize. Nurse Martinez, Admiral said warmly as she entered the room. I want you to meet some friends of mine. One of the new visitors, a man in his early 40s with an unmistakable air of authority, stepped forward. Ms. Martinez, I'm Commander Robert Hayes, currently with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I flew down from this morning specifically to thank you. Sarah was confused by the formal introduction. Thank me for what, sir? I was just doing my job. Your job? Commander Hayes repeated with a slight smile. Do you understand that Admiral has been a mentor to hundreds of SEAL operators over the past 30 years? Do you realize that the techniques he developed for cold water survival have saved lives in operations around the world? Sarah shook her head, still not fully grasping the significance of her actions. The other new visitor, a younger man with intense blue eyes, spoke up. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant John Mitchell. Admiral personally trained me during my final phase of SEAL training 3 years ago. When I heard he had died and been brought back to life by a nurse who refused to give up, I had to come here to meet you personally. The thing is, Admiral interjected, these young men understand something about refusing to quit. It's a fundamental part of their training and their character. When they heard that a civilian nurse had shown the same kind of determination in saving my life, it resonated with them deeply. Sarah began to understand that her actions had created a connection between her civilian medical background and the military culture of persistence and dedication that defined special operations personnel. Admiral told us you studied military physiology, added. That kind of specialized knowledge, combined with the courage to act on it during a crisis, that's exactly the kind of thinking that saves lives in our world. Doctor, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward. What makes this even more remarkable is that Nurse Martinez made these decisions independently. She wasn't following a protocol or consulting with more experienced staff. She applied her knowledge and trusted her instincts. Commander Hayes nodded approvingly. That's what we try to teach our operators. Sometimes the textbook solution isn't the right solution. Sometimes you have to adapt and improvise based on the specific situation. The medical profession could learn from military training, Admiral observed. You teach people to think critically under pressure and to never give up when lives are at stake. As the conversation continued, Sarah learned more about Admiral's background and the respect he commanded within the special operations community. He had not only led combat missions, but had also been instrumental in developing training programs that had improved survival rates for SEAL candidates. During Hell Week, Lieutenant Mitchell explained, Admiral would always tell us that the difference between success and failure often comes down to one person refusing to accept defeat. He would say that sometimes the most important person on a mission is the one who sees what others miss. The parallel to her own experience the night before was obvious, and Sarah began to appreciate why her actions had resonated so strongly with these military professionals. There's something else, Admiral said, his voice becoming more serious. The work you did last night, the knowledge you showed, it suggests you might have aptitudes that could be valuable in military medicine. Sarah wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but she listened carefully. The Naval Special Warfare Command has medical personnel assigned to support SEAL operations, Commander Hayes explained. They need people who understand the unique physiological challenges that elite operators face. Your performance last night suggests you might be exactly the kind of person we need. Are you offering me a job? Sarah asked, surprised by the direction of the conversation. We're suggesting that you consider it, Admiral replied. The Navy has programs for civilian medical professionals who want to contribute to special operations medicine. You would receive additional training, but your instincts and knowledge base suggest you're already thinking like a special operations medic. The offer was tempting, but Sarah felt overwhelmed by the rapid pace of events. I just started working here. I have so much to learn about civilian nursing. That's exactly why this opportunity might be perfect for you, interjected. You're not set in your ways yet. You're still open to new approaches and ideas. Doctor had been listening thoughtfully to the entire conversation. Sarah, this is an extraordinary opportunity. Military medicine would expose you to challenges and experiences that most civilian nurses never encounter. But I'd have to leave here, Sarah pointed out. I'd have to start over again in a completely different environment. You started over 3 days ago when you began working here, Admiral observed gently. And look what you accomplished. Imagine what you could do with the right training and support. Sarah looked around the room at these accomplished military professionals who were showing her respect and consideration that she felt she hadn't earned. Can I think about it? Of course, Commander Hayes replied. This isn't a decision to make lightly, but I want you to understand that opportunities like this don't come along often. The combination of your medical knowledge, your instincts, and your character is exactly what we look for in special operations medical personnel. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. A nurse Sarah didn't recognize peered into the room apologetically. Excuse me, but there are more visitors asking to see Admiral. Hospital security is asking if we should allow them up. Appeared behind the unknown nurse with an expression of barely controlled amazement. Sarah, there are about 15 people in the lobby asking about Admiral. They say they're former students of his. Admiral chuckled weakly from his hospital bed. Word travels fast in the SEAL community. These are probably men I trained or worked with over the years. We should probably clear out some of these visitors, Doctor suggested diplomatically. Admiral needs rest, and the ICU isn't designed for large gatherings. Actually, Admiral said, I'd like Sarah to meet some of these men. If she's considering joining our community, she should understand what kind of people she'd be working with. Commander Hayes nodded in agreement. We can arrange for small groups to visit briefly. It might help her understand the culture she'd be joining. Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself meeting an extraordinary collection of military personnel. Each group included 2 or 3 men who had been trained or mentored by Admiral at various points in their careers. Some were still active duty, others had transitioned to civilian careers, but all shared a common respect for the man whose life she had saved. Staff Sergeant Michael Roberts, a former SEAL who now worked as a paramedic in Lowe's Angels, explained how Admiral's training had saved his life during a mission in Afghanistan. He taught us to think medically about survival situations, how to assess injuries, manage pain, and keep team members functional even when medical evacuation wasn't possible. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Martinez, no relation to Sarah, currently assigned to SEAL Team 2, described how Admiral had revolutionized cold water survival training. Before his innovations, we lost people during training exercises. His understanding of hypothermia and cardiac stress in extreme conditions has prevented countless deaths. Each conversation reinforced the same themes. Admiral was not just a military leader, but an innovator whose ideas had saved lives throughout the special operations community. The men who came to visit him were living proof of his impact. The thing about Admiral, explained Senior Chief, who had flown in from Norfolk, is that he never stopped learning. Even after 30 years in the Navy, he was always studying new medical techniques, new training methods, new ways to keep his people alive. That's why what you did resonates with all of us, added Petty Officer First Class Carlos Vega. You showed the same kind of intellectual curiosity and refusal to accept defeat that the Admiral taught us. As the day progressed, Sarah began to understand that she had accidentally demonstrated the very qualities that these military professionals valued most: knowledge, determination, and the courage to act decisively under pressure. There's something you need to understand about military medicine, Admiral told her during a quiet moment between visitors. It's not just about treating injuries. It's about understanding how elite performers think and function. It's about being part of a team where everyone's life depends on everyone else's expertise. But I don't have military training, Sarah pointed out. I don't understand the culture or the expectations. Culture can be taught, replied, having overheard the conversation. What can't be taught is the instinct to fight for someone's life when everyone else is ready to give up. You already have that. Doctor rejoined the conversation after checking on other patients. Sarah, I've been thinking about this opportunity. From a purely medical perspective, working with special operations personnel would expose you to physiological challenges that most medical professionals never encounter. The training you would receive would make you a better nurse regardless of where you ultimately practice. Plus, Lieutenant Mitchell added, the medical training pipeline for special operations includes some of the most advanced trauma care techniques in the world. You'd be learning from the best physicians and medical professionals the military has to offer. As evening approached and visiting hours ended, Sarah found herself alone with Admiral for the first time since the night before. His condition had improved dramatically, and he was scheduled to be moved from the ICU to a regular room the following morning. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked gently. Sarah sat down in the chair beside his bed, feeling emotionally drained from the day's events. Overwhelmed. This time yesterday, I was just trying to figure out how to use the computer system. Now people are talking about changing my entire career path. Change can be frightening, Admiral acknowledged. But it can also be the path to extraordinary opportunities. The question is whether you're willing to step outside your comfort zone to pursue something that could be truly meaningful. What if I'm not good enough? Sarah asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if last night was just luck? Admiral smiled. Sarah, luck doesn't explain knowing about synchronized for cardiac arrest patients with military backgrounds. Luck doesn't explain recognizing the significance of subtle electrical activity on a heart monitor. What happened last night was the result of knowledge, preparation, and character. But military medicine, that's so different from civilian nursing. Different, yes, but the core purpose is the same, using your knowledge and skills to save lives and reduce suffering. The only difference is that in military medicine, the stakes are often higher and the conditions more challenging. Sarah considered his words carefully. If I were to consider this, what would the next steps be? First, you'd need to talk with Navy medical recruiters to understand the programs available to you. There are several pathways for civilian medical professionals to join military medicine. Some involve active duty service, others work through reserve or contractor positions. Would I have to give up being a nurse? Not at all. Military medicine needs nurses just as much as it needs doctors. In fact, in special operations medicine, nurses often have more hands-on responsibility than in civilian hospitals. As their conversation continued, Sarah began to see a future she had never imagined. The idea of working with elite military personnel, of learning advanced medical techniques, of being part of something larger than herself. It all seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. I need to sleep on this, she finally said. It's too big a decision to make quickly. Of course, Admiral agreed. But remember that the best opportunities often require us to act before we feel completely ready. The men you met today all took leaps of faith at various points in their careers. That night, as Sarah drove home from the hospital, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversations she'd had. Less than 48 hours ago, she had been a nervous new nurse trying to prove herself. Now she was being courted by Navy Special Operations personnel who saw potential in her that she wasn't sure she possessed. The next morning would bring new developments that would test her resolve and force her to make decisions that would define the rest of her career. Sarah arrived at the hospital the next morning to find the parking lot filled with more vehicles than usual, many bearing military base decals and government plates. As she walked through the main entrance, she noticed increased security presence and several men in military dress uniforms speaking with hospital administrators. The nurse's station in the ICU was buzzing with activity when she arrived for her shift, was coordinating with what appeared to be military personnel while trying to maintain normal patient care routines. Sarah, thank goodness you're here, said as soon as she spotted her. Admiral has been asking for you since 6 this morning, and we have a situation developing. What kind of situation? Sarah asked, hanging up her jacket and checking the patient assignment board. The Navy Special Warfare Command wants to hold some kind of ceremony here at the hospital, explained. Apparently, Word about what happened has spread throughout the military community, and they want to recognize you formally. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Recognize me? I don't understand. I just did my job. Doctor appeared at her elbow, looking both pleased and slightly overwhelmed. Sarah, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. Rear Admiral Collins, Chief of Navy Medicine. She flew here from Washington specifically to meet you. The idea of meeting a Rear Admiral was terrifying enough, but the implications of someone flying across the country to see her made Sarah feel lightheaded. Why would she want to meet me? Sarah asked weakly. Because, came a voice from behind her, what you did 3 nights ago has implications that extend far beyond one patient. Sarah turned to see a woman in her early 50s wearing a Navy dress uniform with Admiral's stars on her collar boards. Despite her relatively small stature, she projected an aura of authority and competence that commanded immediate respect. Rear Admiral Collins, Doctor said quickly, this is Sarah Martinez, the nurse we discussed. Ms. Martinez, Admiral Collins said, extending her hand. I'm Collins. I understand you're responsible for saving Admiral's life. I was part of the medical team, ma'am, Sarah replied, shaking the Admiral's hand and trying to keep her voice steady. Don't be modest, Admiral Collins said with a slight smile. I've read the medical reports and I've spoken with everyone involved. Your knowledge and determination were the decisive factors in a successful resuscitation that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah glanced around nervously, aware that the entire ICU staff was watching this interaction. I really just applied what I learned in nursing school. What you learned in nursing school doesn't typically include specialized knowledge of cardiac resuscitation protocols for elite military personnel, Admiral Collins observed. Walk with me, Ms. Martinez. I'd like to discuss something with you privately. As they walked toward a quiet conference room, Admiral Collins continued speaking. Admiral has been briefing me on the conversations you've had about military medicine. I understand Commander Hayes has discussed some opportunities with you. Yes, ma'am, but I haven't made any decisions. They settled into chairs in the small conference room, and Admiral Collins studied Sarah carefully before speaking. Ms. Martinez, how much do you know about the current challenges facing military medicine? Sarah shook her head. Not much, I'm afraid. We're facing a critical shortage of medical personnel who understand the unique physiological demands placed on Special Operations Forces, Admiral Collins explained. Traditional medical training doesn't prepare people for the kinds of injuries and medical challenges that occur during high-intensity military operations. But surely there are military doctors and nurses who have that training, Sarah pointed out. There are, but not enough, and most of them have learned through experience rather than formal education. We need people who can bridge the gap between civilian medical knowledge and military operational requirements. Admiral Collins leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more intense. What happened with Admiral demonstrates exactly the kind of thinking we need. You recognized that his military background created different physiological parameters. You adapted your treatment approach based on that knowledge. That's precisely the kind of medical reasoning that saves lives in operational environments. Sarah was beginning to understand that this conversation was heading somewhere specific. Are you offering me a position, Admiral? I'm offering you an opportunity to be part of something groundbreaking, Admiral Collins replied. The Navy is developing a new medical training program specifically designed to prepare healthcare providers for special operations medicine. We need nurses with your combination of medical knowledge and adaptive thinking to help develop and implement this program. The scope of what Admiral Collins was describing was far beyond anything Sarah had imagined. You want me to help develop a training program, but I have almost no experience. You have the most important kind of experience, the ability to think critically under pressure and adapt your approach based on patient-specific factors. Those skills can't be taught easily, but they can be built upon. What would this involve exactly? Sarah asked, her curiosity overcoming her nervousness. Initially, you would complete an intensive medical training program that would expose you to combat casualty care, wilderness medicine, and the physiological challenges specific to special operations personnel. Then, you would work with experienced military medical personnel to develop training protocols for other healthcare providers. Admiral Collins paused to let this information sink in before continuing. Eventually, You could be assigned to support special operations units directly, providing medical care during training exercises and potentially during operational deployments. The mention of deployments made Sarah's heart race. Deployments, like overseas. Possibly, special operations units deploy worldwide, and they need medical support wherever they go. But that would be years away after extensive training and experience. Sarah tried to process all of this information. 3 days ago, she had been worried about learning the hospital's computer system. Now, she was being offered the opportunity to work directly with Navy SEALs in operational environments. "This is a lot to consider," Sarah said finally. "I understand, but I want you to know that opportunities like this are extremely rare. We don't typically recruit civilian nurses with only months of experience. But your performance under pressure, combined with your specialized knowledge, makes you exactly the kind of person we need." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Peered in apologetically. "Excuse me, Admiral, but Admiral is asking if he can join this conversation. He says there are some things Ms. Martinez should know before making any decisions." Admiral Collins nodded. "Of course, please bring him down." A few minutes later, Admiral arrived in a wheelchair, pushed by one of the ICU nurses. Despite being in a hospital gown and connected to a portable heart monitor, he still projected the kind of presence that commanded respect. "Sarah," he said warmly, "I hope Admiral Collins has been explaining some exciting possibilities to you." "She has, sir. It's all a bit overwhelming." Admiral positioned his wheelchair so he could see both women clearly. "Admiral Collins, have you told her about the research component of this program?" "Not yet," Admiral Collins replied. "I wanted to cover the basic structure first." Admiral turned to Sarah. "One of the things that makes this opportunity unique is that you wouldn't just be learning existing protocols. You'd be helping to develop new ones. The military is very interested in your approach to cardiac emergencies in high-performance populations." "My approach?" Sarah asked, confused. "The techniques you used to save my life," Admiral explained. "The way you modified standard resuscitation protocols based on patient-specific factors. Military medicine needs that kind of innovative thinking." Admiral Collins nodded in agreement. "We want you to help us develop new medical protocols that take into account the unique physiological characteristics of special operations personnel. Your background in nursing, combined with your demonstrated ability to think outside traditional parameters, makes you ideal for this kind of work." Sarah was beginning to understand that they weren't just offering her a job. They were offering her the chance to contribute to medical knowledge that could save lives for years to come. "There's something else," Admiral added. "The men you met yesterday, James, David, and all the others, they've been talking to their contacts throughout the special operations community. Word about what you did is spreading." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked nervously. "It means that people are paying attention to you," Admiral Collins explained. "In a community where performance under pressure is everything, your actions have established a reputation for competence and determination. But that also means that if you decide not to pursue this opportunity, you'll be passing up something that won't come around again," Admiral added gently. Sarah felt the weight of their expectations and her own uncertainty. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" Admiral Collins smiled. "Ms. Martinez, failure is always a possibility when you're pushing boundaries and trying to achieve something extraordinary. But what happened 3 nights ago proves that you have the fundamental qualities necessary for success: knowledge, determination, and the courage to act decisively. Plus," Admiral added, "you wouldn't be doing this alone. You'd be working with some of the most experienced military medical personnel in the world. They would provide mentoring and support throughout your training and beyond." As if summoned by the conversation, Doctor appeared in the conference room doorway. "Excuse me, but there's a delegation from here to see Admiral and Ms. Martinez." Admiral Collins and Admiral exchanged glances. Admiral asked, "Yes, sir. Commander Hayes is with them, along with several other officers. They say they have something they want to present to Ms. Martinez." Sarah felt her anxiety spike again. "Present to me? What could they possibly want to present?" Admiral Collins stood up. "There's only one way to find out. Shall we go see what they have to say?" The group made their way back to Admiral's room, where they found it filled once again with military personnel. Commander Hayes was there, along with several officers Sarah didn't recognize. All were wearing dress uniforms, which gave the gathering a formal, ceremonial atmosphere. "Admiral," Commander Hayes said as they entered the room, "we're glad to see you looking so well." "Thank you, Commander. I understand you have something for Ms. Martinez." Commander Hayes turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "Ms. Martinez, what you did 3 nights ago represents the kind of excellence that the naval special warfare community strives to achieve. Your refusal to accept defeat, your innovative thinking, and your successful outcome embody the values we try to instill in all of our personnel." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to such formal praise, so she simply nodded. "Therefore," Commander Hayes continued, "the commanding officers of Naval Special Warfare Command have decided to recognize your actions formally." One of the other officers stepped forward carrying a wooden presentation box. "Ms. Martinez, on behalf of the men and women of Naval Special Warfare, I present you with this commemorative medallion in recognition of your life-saving actions." Sarah accepted the box with trembling hands. Inside was a heavy bronze medallion featuring the Naval Special Warfare insignia, the eagle, anchor, trident, and pistol that represented the SEAL teams. "This medallion," Commander Hayes explained, "is typically reserved for military personnel who have demonstrated exceptional performance in support of special operations missions. You are the first civilian medical professional ever to receive this recognition." The weight of the medallion in her hands seemed to represent the weight of the decision she was being asked to make. These accomplished military professionals were treating her as an equal, recognizing her as someone worthy of their respect and consideration. "There's an inscription on the back," one of the officers mentioned. Sarah turned the medallion over to read. "For Sarah Martinez, who refused to quit when lives depended on it. Naval Special Warfare Command, 2025. The inscription brought tears to her eyes. These were people who understood what it meant to refuse to quit, who had built their entire careers around that principle. For them to recognize her in those terms was overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "This is incredible." "It's well-deserved," Admiral said from his wheelchair, "and I hope it helps you understand the kind of community you're being invited to join." Commander Hayes nodded. "Ms. Martinez, we've heard about the opportunities being discussed with you. I want you to know that if you decide to join our community, you'll be welcomed not as an outsider learning our ways, but as someone who has already proven that she shares our values." The ceremony continued for several more minutes, with various officers sharing stories about Admiral's impact on their careers and expressing gratitude for Sarah's role in saving his life. Each story reinforced the same themes: the importance of refusing to accept defeat, the value of innovative thinking, and the strength that comes from being part of a team dedicated to excellence. As the formal presentations concluded and the officers began to leave, Admiral Collins approached Sarah again. "Ms. Martinez, I know this has been an emotionally intensive few days, but I need to know if you're interested in pursuing the opportunity we discussed. If so, we need to begin the paperwork and planning process soon." Sarah looked around the room at Admiral, Doctor, and the remaining military personnel. All were waiting for her response, and she realized that her decision would affect not only her own future, but potentially the lives of military personnel she might someday treat. "Can I have until tomorrow morning to decide?" she asked. "Of course," Admiral Collins replied. "This is a life-changing decision, and it deserves careful consideration." As the room gradually emptied and the formal presentations ended, Sarah found herself alone with Admiral once again. He was scheduled to be discharged the following morning, having made a remarkable recovery from his cardiac arrest. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked, echoing the same question from 2 days before. "Scared," Sarah admitted, "but also excited. I never imagined anything like this could happen to me." "Fear is normal when you're considering stepping into the unknown," Admiral replied. "But let me ask you this. Do you feel called to something greater than routine nursing care?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think so. What happened with you felt different from anything I'd experienced before. It felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do." "That's what we call finding your mission," Admiral said with a smile. Some people spend their entire lives looking for work that feels meaningful and important. You may have found yours at age 24. But what if I fail? What if I can't live up to their expectations? Admiral's expression became serious. Sarah, 3 nights ago you saved the life of a man who had given up hope of surviving. You did it by refusing to accept failure and by applying knowledge that others didn't have. If you can do that under those circumstances, you can succeed at anything you set your mind to. That evening, Sarah went home to her small apartment and spent hours researching military medicine, special operations, and the kind of training programs Admiral Collins had described. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that this opportunity represented exactly the kind of meaningful work she had dreamed of when she first decided to become a nurse. But it would require leaving everything familiar behind and starting over in a completely different world. The question was whether she had the courage to take that leap of faith. Sarah barely slept that night. She spent hours staring at the medallion on her nightstand, turning over every conversation and weighing every possibility. By 5 in the morning, she had made her decision, and she arrived at the hospital early to catch Admiral Collins before the morning rounds began. She found the Rear Admiral in the hospital cafeteria, drinking coffee and reviewing documents on a laptop computer. "Ms. Martinez," Admiral Collins said, looking up with surprise, "you're here early." "I've made my decision," Sarah said, sitting down across from her. "I want to accept your offer." Admiral Collins smiled, but her expression remained serious. "Are you certain? This won't be easy, and there will be no going back once you begin the training program." "I'm certain," Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. "I think this is what I'm supposed to do." "Good, then we have a lot of work to do in a very short time." Admiral Collins closed her laptop and focused entirely on Sarah. "The first step is getting you enrolled in the Navy's Medical Officer Candidate program. Since you already have your nursing degree, you'll enter as a direct commission officer." The idea of becoming a naval officer had not fully registered with Sarah until that moment. "I'll be in the Navy." "You'll be a Navy nurse," Admiral Collins explained. "With the rank of Lieutenant Junior grade to start. You'll attend Officer Candidate School, then complete specialized training in military medicine and special operations support." Sarah nodded, trying to absorb all of this information. "How long will the training take?" "The initial phase will be approximately 18 months. Officer Candidate School is 12 weeks, followed by basic military medicine training, and then specialized training in special operations medicine. After that, you'll be assigned to work with experienced military medical personnel to gain practical experience." 18 months, Sarah repeated, considering what that meant for her life. "And after that?" "After that, you could be assigned anywhere the Navy needs special operations medical support. That could mean working with SEAL teams, Marine Special Operations, or other elite units. You might be stationed at Norfolk or any number of other bases." Admiral Collins paused to let this information sink in. "There's also the possibility of forward deployments, assignments where you would accompany special operations units on missions overseas." The reality of what she was committing to was beginning to dawn on Sarah. This wasn't just a career change, it was a complete transformation of her life. "When would I need to start?" she asked. "As soon as possible. We have an officer candidate school class starting in 6 weeks. If you're committed to this path, we need to begin the paperwork immediately." 6 weeks seemed impossibly soon, but Sarah realized that delaying would only make the transition more difficult. "What do I need to do?" Admiral Collins pulled out a folder of documents. "First, you'll need to complete your application for a direct commission. Then you'll need to pass a physical fitness test, a medical examination, and a security clearance investigation." A security clearance investigation. Special operations medicine requires a top-secret clearance. You'll be exposed to classified information about capabilities, techniques, and operations. The investigation will examine your background thoroughly. Sarah had never considered that becoming a nurse might require a security clearance, but it made sense given what she was being asked to do. "Admiral," she said hesitantly, "I need to ask about Admiral. When will he be discharged?" "This morning, actually. He's made a remarkable recovery, though he'll need to follow up with cardiology and take things easy for several weeks. I'd like to say goodbye to him before I leave today." "Of course. In fact, I think he'd like to know about your decision." They finished their conversation and made arrangements for Sarah to begin the application process immediately. Admiral Collins would remain at the hospital for 2 more days to help coordinate Sarah's transition and ensure that all necessary paperwork was completed correctly. Sarah spent the morning completing forms and beginning the complex process of joining the Navy. The physical fitness requirements were intimidating. She would need to pass the same fitness standards required of all naval officers, which meant significant improvement in her running and swimming abilities. Around noon, she took a break to visit Admiral before his discharge. She found him dressed in civilian clothes and packing the few personal items he had accumulated during his hospital stay. "Sarah," he said with a warm smile as she entered his room, "I was hopping to see you before I left. How are you feeling about your decision?" "Nervous but excited," she replied honestly. "Admiral Collins has been helping me understand what I'm getting into." "It's going to be challenging," Admiral acknowledged, "but I have complete confidence in your ability to succeed. The same qualities that saved my life will serve you well in military medicine." "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said, "for encouraging me to consider this opportunity. Without your support, I never would have had the courage to make this decision." Admiral finished packing and sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Sarah, there's something I want you to understand about the path you're choosing. Military medicine isn't just about treating injuries and illness. It's about being part of a mission that's larger than yourself." "What do you mean?" "When you treat a special operations soldier, you're not just healing one person. You're enabling them to continue protecting others. Every life you save, every injury you treat successfully, has a multiplying effect that extends far beyond that individual patient." Sarah had not considered this broader perspective on military medicine. "So I'm not just changing careers, I'm changing my entire purpose." "Exactly. You're moving from providing care to enabling mission success. It's a different kind of responsibility, but also a different kind of fulfillment." Their conversation was interrupted by James and David, who had come to escort Admiral home. "Ms. Martinez," said as they entered the room, "we heard about your decision. Congratulations." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "I'm not sure I fully understand what I've committed to, but I'm ready to find out." "You've committed to joining the finest military medical community in the world," James added. "The training will be tough, but you'll emerge from it as someone capable of saving lives under the most challenging conditions imaginable." David nodded in agreement. "Plus, you'll be working with people who share your commitment to excellence and refusal to accept defeat. It's a community where your actions 3 nights ago are seen as normal rather than extraordinary." As Admiral prepared to leave the hospital, he pulled Sarah aside for a final private conversation. "There's one more thing I want you to know," he said quietly. "The medallion they gave you yesterday, that's not just a commemorative item. It's a symbol of acceptance into a community. Carry it with you during your training. When things get difficult, remember that it represents the respect of people who have faced the most challenging circumstances imaginable." "I will," Sarah promised. "And remember that you have support throughout this community. The men you met over the past few days will be following your progress and cheering for your success. You're not doing this alone." After Admiral left, Sarah returned to working with Admiral Collins on her application materials. The paperwork was extensive and detailed, covering everything from her educational background to her financial history. "The security clearance investigation will be the most time-consuming part," Admiral Collins explained. "They'll interview your family, friends, former employers, and anyone else who knows you well. They need to verify that you're trustworthy and reliable." "How long does that take?" "Several months, usually, but we can begin your other training while the investigation is pending. You'll receive an interim clearance that will allow you to start officer candidate school and basic medical training." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah began to understand the magnitude of the bureaucratic process involved in joining the military. Every aspect of her life would be examined and documented. Her commitment was becoming more real with each form she completed. Around 4 o'clock, Doctor found her in the conference room where she was working on paperwork. "Sarah," he said, sitting down across from her, "I wanted to talk to you before you make this transition official." "What's on your mind, Doctor?" "I've been watching you work for the past week, and I've been impressed not just by what happened with Admiral, but by your overall approach to nursing. You have natural instincts and a genuine commitment to patient care. Sarah wasn't sure where this conversation was heading. Thank you. What I want to say is that you have the potential to be an exceptional nurse, regardless of whether you choose military or civilian medicine. If you ever decide that military life isn't for you, there will always be a place for you in civilian healthcare. Sarah appreciated his support, but she also detected a note of concern in his voice. Do you think I'm making a mistake? Doctor considered his answer carefully. I think you're making a brave decision to pursue an opportunity that could be extraordinarily rewarding. But I also want you to know that success in civilian nursing doesn't require you to leave everything familiar behind. I understand that, Sarah replied. But I think this opportunity represents something I need to explore. The work they're describing, developing new medical protocols, working with elite military units, contributing to mission success rather than just patient care, it feels like what I'm supposed to be doing. Doctor nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right reason for making this decision. You're following your sense of purpose rather than just reacting to excitement or flattery. Plus, Sarah added with a slight smile, I can always come back to civilian nursing if military medicine doesn't work out. That's true, though I suspect once you experience military medicine, civilian nursing will seem tame by comparison. Their conversation was interrupted by, who appeared in the conference room doorway looking both proud and sad. Sarah, she said, I just heard about your decision. I wanted to congratulate you and tell you how proud I am of what you've accomplished. Thank you, you've been an incredible mentor to me. I've barely had time to mentor you, replied with a laugh. You've been here less than a week, and you've already anything I could teach you. That's not true. You showed me how to be confident in emergency situations. You demonstrated what it means to advocate for patients even when it's difficult. Sat down and looked at Sarah seriously. Military medicine is going to challenge you in ways you can't imagine right now. The training will be physically and mentally demanding. The responsibilities will be enormous, but I have complete confidence that you'll succeed. How can you be so sure? Because, replied, you've already demonstrated that you can perform under pressure and make life-or-death decisions correctly. Everything else is just training and experience. As the day ended and Sarah prepared to leave the hospital, she realized that this might be her last shift as a civilian nurse. Within 6 weeks, she would be at officer candidate school in Newport Island, beginning a journey that would transform her from a nervous new nurse into a military medical officer. Admiral Collins found her as she was gathering her personal items from her locker. Ms. Martinez, she said, I wanted to give you some idea of what to expect over the next few weeks. The application process will be intense, but we'll have support staff helping you every step of the way. What's the most important thing I should focus on? Physical fitness, Admiral Collins replied immediately. You need to be able to meet Navy fitness standards before you report to officer candidate school. That means running, swimming, and strength training almost every day. Sarah had been a casual runner in college, but she knew her current fitness level was nowhere near military standards. How should I prepare? We'll connect you with a physical training specialist who works with officer candidates. He'll design a training program specifically for your needs and timeline. 6 weeks seems like such a short time to get ready. Admiral Collins smiled. It is a short time, but remember that you're not trying to become a Navy SEAL. You're preparing to become a Navy nurse. The fitness standards are challenging but achievable with dedicated training. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on how completely her life had changed in less than a week. 7 days ago, she had been a nervous new nurse worried about making basic mistakes. Tonight, she was a future naval officer preparing to join one of the most elite medical communities in the world. The medallion from Naval Special Warfare Command sat on her passenger seat, catching the light from passing. It represented not just recognition for what she had already accomplished, but expectations for what she might achieve in the future. For the first time since Admiral's cardiac arrest, Sarah felt completely certain that she was making the right decision. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but they were overshadowed by excitement about the possibilities ahead. She was about to discover that the real adventure was just beginning. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood on the grounds of Officer Candidate School in Newport Island, watching her fellow candidates struggle through their first physical fitness assessment. The intensive training program Admiral Collins had arranged had transformed her from a casual runner into someone capable of meeting Navy standards, but the military environment was still overwhelming. Candidate Martinez, Chief Petty Officer, called out as Sarah completed her final push-up. "Outstanding performance, you've been training." "Yes, Chief," Sarah replied, breathing heavily but feeling proud of her improvement. "What's your background, candidate?" Chief asked, reviewing her file. "I'm a nurse, Chief, direct commission through the medical officer program." Chief looked at her with increased interest. "Medical officer program, huh? What kind of nursing?" "Emergency department, Chief, but I'm training for special operations medicine." The chief's demeanor shifted noticeably. "Special operations medicine? That's serious business, candidate. You ready for that kind of responsibility?" "I believe so, Chief." Believing isn't enough in special operations. You need to know, deep in your bones, that you can perform when lives depend on it. Sarah thought about Admiral and the night that had changed everything. "I know I can, Chief." Over the following weeks, Officer Candidate School proved to be everything Admiral Collins had warned her about and more. The physical training was relentless, the academic requirements were extensive, and the military culture was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. But she also discovered that her medical background gave her advantages that other candidates lacked. Her knowledge of anatomy and physiology made the survival training easier. Her experience working under pressure in hospital emergency situations translated well to the stress of military training exercises. Most importantly, the respect she had earned within the special operations community had preceded her to Newport. Word about the nurse who had saved Admiral's life had spread throughout military medical circles, and Sarah found herself being treated not as just another officer candidate, but as someone who had already proven her value. Candidate Martinez, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wilson, the school's medical officer, called her aside after a particularly challenging training exercise. "I understand you're heading to Special Operations Medicine after graduation." "Yes, ma'am. I've heard about what happened in SAN. Impressive work." "Thank you, ma'am." Lieutenant Commander Wilson studied Sarah carefully. "Special Operations Medicine is different from anything you've experienced in civilian healthcare. Are you prepared for what that means?" Sarah had been asked this question many times over the past 2 months, but she was still discovering new layers to the answer. "I think I understand the basics, ma'am. Higher stress, more dangerous conditions, patients with unique training and physiological characteristics." "That's part of it," Lieutenant Commander Wilson agreed. "But there's something else. In civilian medicine, your primary responsibility is to the patient. In military medicine, especially special operations medicine, you have responsibilities to the mission as well." "What does that mean practically?" "It means that sometimes you'll have to make decisions about medical care based not just on what's best for one patient, but on what's best for the entire team. It means understanding that the people you're treating are not just patients. They're weapons systems that need to be maintained and optimized for peak performance." The concept of thinking about patients as weapons systems was jarring, but Sarah was beginning to understand the military perspective on medical care. "It also means," Lieutenant Commander Wilson continued, "that your medical decisions can have strategic implications. The difference between a special operations soldier being able to continue a mission versus being evacuated can affect the outcome of operations that impact national security." Sarah had not fully considered this aspect of military medicine. "How do I prepare for that kind of responsibility?" "Experience and training," Lieutenant Commander Wilson replied, "which is why the advanced training you'll receive after OCS is so intensive. You'll learn not just how to treat military patients, but how to think strategically about medical support for special operations missions." As Officer Candidate School progressed, Sarah began to receive messages of support and encouragement from the special operations community she would soon join. Sent regular emails updating her on Admiral's recovery and sharing news about mutual acquaintances. Commander Hayes forwarded articles about advances in special operations medicine. Even Admiral himself wrote occasional letters offering encouragement and advice. But the most meaningful communication came from an unexpected source. During her 8th week at OCS, Sarah received a letter from a Navy SEAL she had never met. "Ms. Martinez," the letter began, My name is Petty Officer First Class Michael Torres, and I'm currently deployed with SEAL Team 3. You don't know me, but I know about what you did for Admiral. Admiral was my instructor during Bud-S training 3 years ago, and he's been a mentor to me throughout my career. When I heard that he had died and been brought back to life by a nurse who refused to give up, it affected me deeply. Admiral has saved my life more than once through his training and guidance. To know that someone saved his life means more to me than I can express. I wanted you to know that there are people around the world who are grateful for what you did, people you may never meet, but whose lives have been impacted by your actions. I also wanted you to know that we're all rooting for your success in military medicine. The Special Operations community takes care of its own, and as far as we're concerned, you're already one of us. If you ever need anything, anywhere in the world, you have family in the Special Operations community who will support you. The letter was signed by Petty Officer Torres and countersigned by 12 other members of his SEAL team, all expressing similar sentiments. Sarah read the letter multiple times, feeling overwhelmed by the support and acceptance it represented. These were people who faced life-and-death situations regularly, who understood better than anyone what it meant to refuse to give up when lives were at stake. For them to consider her part of their community was both humbling and inspiring. During her final week at Officer Candidate School, Sarah received orders for her next assignment. She would report to the Naval Special Warfare Center for advanced training in Special Operations Medicine. The program would last 6 months and would expose her to everything from combat casualty care to dive medicine to high-altitude physiology. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Martinez," Chief said as he handed her the orders, "is where the real training begins." "Thank you, Chief, I'm ready." "Are you? Special Operations Medicine isn't just advanced nursing. It's a completely different way of thinking about health care." Sarah had heard variations of this warning many times, but she was beginning to understand that each person who offered it was trying to prepare her for different aspects of what lay ahead. Graduation from Officer Candidate School was attended by Sarah's family, along with several surprise visitors. Admiral flew in from San, still recovering from his cardiac event, but looking healthy and energetic. James and David also attended, wearing their dress uniforms and representing the Special Operations community that had essentially adopted Sarah. "Lieutenant Martinez," Admiral said after the graduation ceremony, using her new rank for the first time, "I'm proud of how far you've come in such a short time." "Thank you, Admiral. I couldn't have done this without your encouragement." "You could have, but I'm glad I was able to help. How are you feeling about?" "Nervous but excited," Sarah replied honestly. "I know it's going to be challenging." "It will be the most challenging training you've ever experienced," interjected. "But it will also be the most rewarding. You'll emerge from that program capable of saving lives under conditions that most medical professionals can't even imagine." Admiral nodded in agreement. "The medicine you'll learn isn't taught anywhere else. You'll be working with physicians and nurses who have deployed with special operations units around the world. Their experience will become your foundation." "Plus," David added with a grin, "you'll finally get to meet some of the people whose lives you might someday save. It makes the training more meaningful when you understand who you're preparing to serve." Sarah's family was somewhat overwhelmed by the attention she was receiving from these distinguished military professionals. Her parents had been supportive, but uncertain about her decision to leave civilian nursing for military medicine. Meeting Admiral and the others helped them understand the significance of the opportunity their daughter was pursuing. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," Admiral addressed Sarah's parents, "your daughter has a special gift for emergency medicine. The training she's about to receive will develop that gift into capabilities that could save dozens of lives over the course of her career." "We're very proud of her," Sarah's mother replied, "but we worry about the dangers she might face." "Military medicine does involve risks," Admiral acknowledged, "but those risks are managed through extensive training and preparation. Sarah will be one of the best-trained medical professionals in the world by the time she completes her education." As the graduation celebration concluded and Sarah prepared to travel to California for the next phase of her training, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. 9 weeks ago, she had been a nervous new nurse making basic mistakes. Tonight, she was a commissioned naval officer preparing to join one of the most elite medical communities in the world. The medallion from Naval Special Warfare Command had traveled with her through Officer Candidate School, serving as a reminder of the expectations and support of the community she was joining. Now it would accompany her too, where she would begin learning the advanced skills that would define her career. Sarah's first day at the Naval Special Warfare Center was overwhelming in its intensity. The facility was massive, encompassing training areas for every aspect of special operations preparation. She could see SEAL candidates struggling through physical training on the beach, advanced operators practicing close-quarters combat in specialized facilities, and medical personnel training in mock combat environments. Lieutenant Martinez, Lieutenant Commander James greeted her as she reported for duty. "Welcome to Corona.